So when you're talking about the top 5 point guards in the NBA, I don't think you have to provide much of a breakdown for Steph Curry at number 1, so not really going to bother with that. Not even going to go into too much detail about number 2, because while I believe that Westbrook had a little bit of a down season by his standards last year because his efficiency was worse and the teammates around him were better, even if he still put up the triple-double, I do still think he's number 2 in the league, and sure, I mean, there's definitely the critics of Westbrook who are going to cite to bad shot selection, but I think the positive outweighs the negative. But I do think at number 3 and 4, an interesting conversation comes up with Kyrie Irving and then Chris Paul, 2 point guards who are kind of drastically different if you think about it. Let's make the case for CP right now. He's probably the most efficient point guard and maybe the most efficient player in the NBA when you look at the total package of like never turning the ball over, amount of shots that he makes compared to how many he takes and all that. But to make the case for Kyrie Irving being ahead of CP, number 1, I think Kyrie just got better defensively on the Celtics. Not to say that he's like a above average defender, but I think he went from bad to being sometimes passable. But the other thing with Kyrie, and why I believe that he is better than Chris Paul, is that you can get into the semantics of, well, Chris Paul's a better passer, he's a better defender, and all that stuff. When you can put up 45 points out of nowhere the way Kyrie can, I think especially at the point guard position, that is more valuable than Chris Paul putting up 17 points, 10 assists, and playing really good defense the entire time. I mean, sure, those who use the argument of, well, Chris Paul's a better pure point guard or whatever, yeah, you're going to think Chris Paul's the better player. But I feel like that argument doesn't really have much value. I think that's just a buzzword and nothing else. 2018 NBA, it's just done a lot of things to the point guard position. I mean, Steve Nash, when comparing himself to Steph Curry, someone who I think Kyrie really isn't that far away from in terms of play style, he said that maybe if I was making 1 million threes rather than averaging 11 assists a game, it would have made my teams better offensively. And I think that sort of thing can be applied to the Chris Paul versus Kyrie Irving argument. So anyway, to sum that whole thing up, I'm going with Kyrie Irving at number 3 and then Chris Paul at number 4. Before we talk about number 5, let's just do some honorable mentions to make people feel good, I guess. Drew Holiday is improving quite a lot and is maybe on the trajectory to being one of the best two-way guards in the league. He may technically be a 2-guard, and even then I don't think he really gets into this conversation. Kemba Walker, with better teammates, may actually be one of the top 5 point guards in the NBA. Unfortunately, we're never going to know it as long as he's on the Hornets, unless they go and acquire some talent, but who knows where his career is going. Mike Conley, you could say, is like a better version of Drew Holiday, maybe a little worse version of Chris Paul. The all-around game, the defense, and his offensive efficiencies have maintained themselves, even as the Grizzlies have asked him to do more for them. And then we can also talk about Kyle Lowry, where, funny enough, amongst all the clowning of the Raptors for getting swept by the Cavs, Lowry was pretty damn good in that series, and he's still maintained himself as he's getting older. And now I want to talk about Ben Simmons for about a minute here. I had to think for longer than 2 seconds about whether Simmons is going to make some crazy improvements this year to where he could actually get into this top 5, because the dude has a real chance of like averaging a triple-double in his career, and I think he's got a chance to be like one of the best defensive players in the league as well. However, number 1, it's really difficult to put a position on him. I think the closest thing for his rookie season would be point guard. Who the hell knows if he's actually going to play it moving forward. But also, I just don't think in his second season that he's ready just yet. So anyway, let's talk about the number 5 spot. The names aren't really going to surprise you. One of them is John Wall, and then the other one is Damian Lillard. I think this one has a lot of similarities to the Kyrie-Chris Paul thing, where if you're going to compare just like every little bits of their game, then I think you're going to come to the fact that John Wall is a more all-around player, right? He's a better passer. He's been a better defender, but He has not been that great the past 2 seasons, whereas I think Lillard has actually gotten better defensively. But even then, I guess you could still give the edge to John Wall. And one thing that hurts Wall is that he wasn't the best last season in the regular season, just because he was injured and all that. And one thing that hurts Lillard is that he was terrible in the previous series against the Pelicans. So it's a close race between these two, and I would not expect there to be a consensus among these two guys. I mean, if you go look on Twitter, go look on Reddit, and you ask which one of these guys is better, you're probably going to get like a 50-50 split or pretty close to it. So I don't think there's necessarily a wrong answer, but with everything being said, I do love shooting at the point guard position, so I'm going to go Damian Lillard. Again, it's tough to say at this very moment just because he was bad against the Pelicans and John Wall was actually pretty damn good against the Raptors, but I think just being able to shoot as a point guard and combined with John Wall's inefficiencies being kind of a bigger deal than I think people make them out to be, I think I would still have to go Lillard at number 5. Then we recap with CP3 at number 4, Mr. Fundamental at the point guard spot. Kyrie, who I think is actually closing the gap a bit with Russell Westbrook, but even so I would have Russ at number 2. And then of course the guy who I don't really need to talk about at all, Steph Curry at number 1, and them's the breaks.